Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers reporter for Buha's Block. And the Lakers signed a center. They have a starting center on the roster. They agreed to terms with Deandre Ayton today, signing him to a 2-year, $16.6 million deal with a player option on the second year. They won the Deandre Ayton sweepstakes over 6 other teams, including the Pacers, Knicks, Clippers, Bucks, Cavs, and Nuggets. And I think the Lakers got the best available center in free agency, certainly remaining, but I think you could argue, looking at all the options and how they fit with what LA needed, I think you could debate Ayton versus Turner, but with what the Lakers need in terms of finishing and touch around the rim, a pick and roll partner for Luka, a lob threat for Luka, Ayton checks a lot more of those boxes compared to a player like Miles Turner, who is more predominantly a catch and shoot and pick and pop big. So I think for what the Lakers needed, for what Luka needed, Ayton was the best available player on the open market in terms of free agency. And I'm going to do a Deandre Ayton scouting report and a film breakdown similar to the one I just did on Jake LaRavia. So if you guys haven't checked that out yet, after this live, please go check it out on my channel. But did about a 25-minute breakdown of going through a scouting report of LaRavia and then breaking down his skill set on both sides of the ball, his strengths, his weaknesses, and how he fits in with what the Lakers are trying to do. So I'll do something similar with Ayton. I already have the scouting report ready. I already have the clips ready. But I want to touch on a little bit here with just a little preview of what I think of Ayton and his fit. So looking at the realistic targets for the Lakers, both on the trade market and in free agency, I think he's the most skilled and talented offensive big. He has the best variety within his offensive skill set. He can roll, he can pop, much more of a mid-range elbow type popper in terms of pick and pop. But it can. I mean, he's shot in the low to mid 50s in that range, which is a really elite level, especially for a big. He can catch and shoot. Again, mainly within the arc. Post up against mismatches, also post up against other centers, and then also a solid cutter and a guy who could dive into space. An elite rim scorer with an array of different moves and hook shots, and it's got a soft touch shot about 80% at the rim this past season, which is an elite mark and often a mark for guys who only dunk the ball, but he does a lot more than just that. He is mainly a drop big defensively, but I think there is some more flexibility within his defensive game. I think you can switch him. We saw Portland use him in switching schemes at times last season. So I think there was some film of him versus Giannis where he was able to contain and corral Giannis on drives. And I don't know if you're getting that every single night from him, but I think I think he can fit into JJ's scheme better than a lot of people would expect and better than he was used at times in Portland, primarily as a deep drop big. I think he's a solid post defender who uses his size well. He's got a 7'6" wingspan. He's legit 7 feet, 252 pounds. So someone that I think can be disruptive with his length, even on those switches when he's switching onto a wing, when he's switching onto a guard, he can he'll take a step back and leverage that length. And I think he does a pretty good job with that. Gives LA another 15 plus point per game scores. So if they go with the projected starting 5 as of right now of Ayton, LeBron, Rui, Austin, and Luka, any one of those guys could drop 15 plus on a given night. Any one of those guys could really drop 20 plus on a given night. So just adds another element of offensive firepower. And he was the starting center on a finals team in 2021. He was a playoff riser in his first couple of playoff performances in 2021 and 2022. He's been a double-digit rebounder his entire career. So there's a baseline level there of rebounding has been a big part of the Lakers, I think, lack of success defensively, and it's been a struggle for them. It's not been something they prioritize with a lot of their bigs outside of course, Anthony Davis. And I think Ayton is going to plug that hole. In terms of the case against him or the weaknesses, I think we know about some of the concerns with motor and motivation. There was the recent Athletic article, which had some concerning stuff in it, though there's been some pushback privately. I've heard behind the scenes with some of the things with that. And I know Portland people have been advocating for Ayton and his character and his just how he was in that locker room and whatnot. So I think there's some mixed intel on like how he actually is behind the scenes. And, I know there's been some more positive stuff coming out recently. I think really the biggest stuff is like he hasn't played 70 games in a season since his rookie year. So there's been some health and injury stuff with him over the past, that's 6 of his 7 seasons. He's played under 70 games. So you can kind of pencil him in for 15 plus missed games each season. I think sometimes the decision-making and processing could be better. Like last year, I've now referenced this several times. He averaged more turnovers than assists. I think that's problematic, and that's something that they're going to have to work on with him in terms of just the decision making with shot pass decisions and not rushing things too much. I think sometimes he can rush stuff with dribble handoffs or passing reads, or sometimes in the post he'll have a mismatch and then he'll just kind of fling something up there. And that also goes into, there's been some criticisms of his game with being a little too finesse and not getting to the free throw line, not playing with a certain level of physicality. So those are some things, but I think when you look at his production and his talent and his skill and his track record, even with some of these questions or concerns or weaknesses or whatever, however you want to deem them, for this guy to be making $8.3 million, 8.25, to be making less than a quarter of what he was previously making for Portland, that $35.6 million salary, it's like, it's hard to quibble. It's hard to, like, he's making less than Brook Lopez. He's making just a little bit more than Clint Capella. He's probably making similar to what Al Horford's going to make. So when comparing him to those types of guys, it's just a no-brainer situation for the Lakers. And I think if they get the contract year, DeAndre Ayton locked in, playing with Luka, playing with LeBron, playing under JJ, with the bright lights of LA, playing in a Lakers uniform, and just all that comes with that, and all the pressure that comes with that, but sometimes that could lead to a career year. Like I think you could see him maximized in a way. And really the Lakers, I think, will rely on him less than he was relied on in Phoenix or in Portland. And I think that could pay dividends in terms of just the season that he has for them. Couple notes talking to people around the situation that I wanted to share. I've heard that Luka and DeAndre have a good relationship dating back to the 2018 draft. Obviously, they were both taken at the top of that draft. They do share an agent in Bill Duffy, and that is a mutual link there. But they've grown closer since 2018. There's a mutual respect and admiration and genuine friendship there. Their families have met each other, and they obviously played against each other in the playoffs. But my understanding is that Luka signed off on this. Luka was excited about this. He was excited about DeAndre starting next to him, playing with him in the pick and roll, and just the potential partnership there, and him as a lob threat. And with he's thrived with Chris Paul, also played with Ricky Rubio. But when you look at Luka and his ability in the pick and roll and just the additional size that he has and how that unlocks certain things that even a Chris Paul can't do sometimes just because of the passing reads and angles and whatnot. Like there's just a reason why guys like Luka, LeBron, Jokic, they have certain passing reads that some of the smaller creators just can't always access. So I think this is going to be a really good fit. Again, there's certainly some things you could criticize, or there are some concerns and maybe some things like that, that this doesn't work out, but we'll see. I think, again, for $8 million, it's hard for the Lakers to find a better value realistically. Now, in terms of what's next for the Lakers, I think that's the big thing here, right? I continue to hear that Al Horford is likely going to Golden State. That seems to be the buzz. So I know there's been a bit of a pipe dream out there that the Lakers could land Al Horford for that 5.1 biannual exception. But if you look at the center market and the guys in his projected price range, those guys are all getting $7 to $9, $7 to $10 million. So I think that would be too big of a pay cut for Al Horford. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but the buzz that's out there is that Al Horford is likely going to go to Golden State. Maybe there was going to be a scenario in which Ayton chose a different team and then Horford would have gone to LA. But now that Ayton is in LA, it seems like Horford is likely going to Golden State. And next thing is that I heard today the Lakers remain in the mix for De'Anthony Melton, and that the Ayton signing was partly holding that up, and they wanted just a clarity with that situation. Now, I don't know if that's for the 5.1 biannual exception or for the vet min, which would be 3 point something, and then he would count for 2.3 on the cap. I think coming off an ACL injury, I'd feel more comfortable with Melton on a minimum, but you could argue that based on his prior production and value that he is more of a biannual exception level player. So that remains to be seen whether he signs with the Lakers and also if that's for the biannual or the vet min. But I think tentatively it's looking like they are the slight favorites to end up signing Melton. And then next thing for the Lakers is a 3-and-D starting wing. I think if you look at the projected starting group and in the current roster, like the offensive firepower is awesome. You have shooting and spacing, and as I mentioned, a starting group where any of the five could drop 15 plus, maybe even 20 plus on any given night. But there are still some clear defensive concerns with LeBron's about to be 41, year 23. I think Ayton's a better defender than often given credit for, but he's not some dominant rim protector. Rui is often forced to play out of position at the 3 and defend guys that are quicker and more athletic than him. Austin is often tasked with guarding the point of attack and guarding guys that are quicker and more athletic than him. So the Lakers still need to add a defensive starting wing that complements the other 4 players. And that's where they're turning their attention right now. So my understanding is there's a bit of a lack of clarity in terms of, are they going for a starting center or are they going for a starting wing? They're kind of going for both. But now that they signed Ayton, they're turning their attention more to the wings on the market. And they have over $40 million in expirings. They have the future first, either 2031 or 2032. They have Dalton Connect, and they have up to 4 pick swaps if they're putting the first on the table. If they're not, then they have up to 5 pick swaps. They're also looking for a backup center that could potentially come in free agency, though if it's not Horford, it seems more likely that's going to happen through the trade market. I think we can tentatively write off them trading for a starting level center. I don't have clarity or certainty that that's like 100% the case, but my understanding is the plan right now is for Ayton to be the starting center, and I don't think they're going to try to replace him with a starting level center, but I don't have that with 100% certainty. And one note that I think is important, that Yossi Gozlan, who does a great job breaking down all the cap stuff on X and on his YouTube channel, should have him on the show soon. He noted that the Lakers can use the biannual exception. I guess this is a recent development, that they could use it actually as a trade exception. And so that's for $5.1 million. So they could potentially get a backup center that fits within that $5.1 million. And of note, I think this is interesting, like Nick Richards, who seems to be on the outs in Phoenix just based on trading for Mark Williams, drafting Maluach. He makes exactly $5 million. So he would fit nicely into that 5.1. And he's been someone that's been attached to the Lakers, floated around for the Lakers. So he's just under that $5.1 million. Also, I think as an aside, like separate from the Ayton situation and free agency, we did get some clarity today on Adou Thiero. His name is pronounced Thiero, apparently, similar to Hero, but with a T. That's per Lakers PR. But he is not going to be participating in Lakers Summer League this year due to an ongoing left knee ailment that he's been dealing with going back to his college days. So he will sit out all of Summer League, but he is expected to make a full return by the start of training camp. Obviously not great news for the Lakers. You'd rather see him play in Summer League and see how he fits in his skill set and how NBA ready he is. But it's also better to rest him, not force that, and have him make a full recovery rather than the short-sighted move of rushing him back. So that's something to monitor. And we've seen sometimes with Laker players in the past that are dealing with summer injuries, it does linger a little bit longer, linger into the season, but new medical staff or relatively new medical staff. So we'll see how that goes, but obviously not a great start to the summer from that regard in terms of Summer League and his availability. But Bronny's going to be playing, Dalton Connect's going to be playing, Trey Jemison's going to be playing. Unclear how much they're playing. We spoke with Dalton and Bronny today. I posted the Bronny availability on my YouTube channel. And then Cole Swider's back. And that's a fun one. And he and Dalton are having a shooting competition after practice. So those are all the relevant updates. Let's get into the Q&A portion here. Appreciate you all. Shout out to the late night gang. But right now we're the early evening gang. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. I've heard he brings dominance. His name is Dominatin'. Parentheses, this is going to be a massive meme this season. Yeah, I mean, we know about the nickname. We know about the memes. I think, again, he's a guy who's been pretty consistent. I know there are questions about the physicality, the motor, and different things, but you look at the production has always been there. Sometimes the impact isn't quite there to the level of the production, but I think for $8 million, like if you just looked at, if you took away the pedigree and the name, and it was more about how he's actually produced and played, I think people would be calling this universally a steal, and that's what I think it is. And really the other part of this is the Lakers functionally turned Dorian Finney-Smith into DeAndre Ayton and Jake LaRavia, a starting level center, and a guy who I think has some real potential off the bench as a bench wing / forward. So they flipped one player into two, and it's also really like one player in the 3 seconds that they gave up in the D'Lo DFS trade. But I think in terms of depth, like they are on paper deeper than they were a week ago, and I think you could argue better. Now, we'll see what they do with the rest of their moves. I still think they have to make a notable trade and invest some draft capital to upgrade the roster. But yeah, we'll see. The jury's not out yet with the offseason. D.A. Barkis, thank you for the super chat. Could MPJ for Rui a first and expirings? Are you asking if that's possible or if that... I have not heard that yet. That is an interesting one. I'm going to look up. MPJ is making like $38 million, I want to say. He's got another year left. It's like 70 million over the 2 years. Yeah, 38.3 next year, 40.1. So he does fall in line with the 2027 plan, which, you know, I guess that's important. I would consider that. The issue for me with MPJ is just the defense. And I think if you're trading for MPJ, you are trading for him to be a starter, and now you're starting Luka, Austin, and MPJ, and I just think that's a problematic perimeter trio. So while I think he's an upgrade over Rui, and from like a pure value perspective, I would trade Rui in a first, and whatever expiring I needed to match, you know, it'd probably have to be Kleba and Gabe just to match up the salary there. I think that the perimeter defense would be problematic, to put it kindly. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. If we want to win, look at the starting lineup: AR, Luka, Rui, Braun, Ayton. Ideally both, but at least one of AR or Rui needs to be traded for a better defender. I agree. I think between those two, it's much more likely that Rui is the one that's traded for a better defender, and that is like a 2 or a 3 who starts next to Austin and Luka. I've talked about, like, ideally that player can defend 1 through 3, maybe 1 through 4, and just take on whoever's the best 1 through 4 scorer / ball handler / creator of an opposing team. That player guards them. Then you have like LeBron guard the secondary front court guy. Of course, you know, assuming it's not a center, that would be Ayton. And then if it's a backcourt player, then you have Austin guard the secondary backcourt guy, and then you're protecting Luka within your defensive scheme. But I'm with you that I think this starting lineup is not good enough defensively, and they need to make an upgrade Then Tokoloom, thank you for the super chat. How much is Horford quoted at? He's still amazing. I don't have an exact number, but just that he's expected to command in the market range of a Brook Lopez or like at least a Capella, if not closer to a Brook Lopez. So quick math, Capella's making about $7 million a year. Lopez is making about $9 million. So I would put him somewhere in that $7 to $9 million range, which is a little bit out of the Lakers, who can offer 5.1. So if you look at Golden State as well, they could offer more money than the Lakers, but they could also potentially offer a bigger role, either as a placeholder starter or as a heavily featured backup. Whereas with the Lakers, I think Ayton is going to be a 30-plus minute a night guy, as he's always been, and that limits Horford's potential role in addition to the limited money. So I again, based on the conversations I've had in the fallout of the Ayton situation, it seems like Horford is probably not realistic for LA. Like, he'd have to really want to be in LA and take less money and probably a smaller role, which I think is just seems unlikely right now, but certainly within the realm of possibility until it's official. Joe, thank you for the super chat. Bill Simmons said on his pod today that Braun will get traded because even with Ayton, Lakers don't have a championship caliber team. Thoughts? There's a lot to unpack here. So are you asking if I agree with Bill, or are you asking if I think the Well, I guess there's a couple parts here. Are you asking if I think LeBron will be traded, or if I think the Lakers are a championship caliber team? I guess I'll answer both. I still don't think LeBron is going to be traded. I know he had the photo today with the hat with Cleveland, and it's really hard to find a LeBron trade that makes sense for both the team and the Lakers. I think you have to look at you got to have the matching salary and upwards of mid 50s, and then you also, like, the Lakers are going to want, they're not just going to take on like matching salary just to take on matching salary. It has to be good players. It's going to have to be guys who aren't, like, unless they're of a certain caliber, guys who aren't under contract for more than a couple of years. So that limits that potential pool there. They're probably going to want draft capital on top of it, and looking at like a similar package to what Houston got, or what Phoenix got for Kevin Durant, and what Houston gave up. So I think those parameters are difficult to find a natural trade partner. I have floated out teams that I think would make sense. And in the case of Dallas, a team that I have heard linked to LeBron behind the scenes, but even then, it's like the Dallas trade, you got to take on 4 guys basically to make the salary work. And is Dallas throwing in a pick? Are they throwing in a couple picks? Are they throwing in 0 picks? Like we have the proof of concept with Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington. I just don't see a clear. And with Cleveland, it's like they're a second apron team. So I just think it's hard to find. Like, New York's interesting, I guess, if it's OG and Mitchell, or if it's Cat straight up. But are they throwing in picks in that? Like, it's tough to see a team that, like, you got to have LeBron sign off on it, the Lakers sign off on it, and the opposing team sign off on it. Anytime, it's almost like a 3-team trade in its own weird way. So I'm still, things can change, and I feel like whatever minuscule percent it was before, it has probably gone up by a little bit over the past couple days, but I still think it's far more likely than not that he remains a Laker going into next season. And then in terms of Lakers having a championship caliber team, I think they're closer after today's signing. I've been saying I think they're the 5th best team in the West. I still have OKC, Houston, and Denver comfortably ahead of them. I think, you can maybe argue with them versus Minnesota. I also think it's worth mentioning the Clippers and the Warriors in that mix. Clippers, I like, there's just always the Kawhi variable. There's also, like, Harden is kind of like, he had a really good year last year, but the year before wasn't as good. So I think there's some like uncertainty with just how he continues to age. And I do really like the Lopez signing for them, but Warriors, they got Steph now in his late 30s. You got Jimmy with his injury history. So there's some questions with Golden State as well. So I wouldn't tentatively have the Lakers as like the 4th or 5th best team in the West, but I do think the top 3 is clear cut, and I would not have the Lakers on the same tier as those teams currently. Now we'll see if they go trade for an Andrew Wiggins, if they go trade for a Herb Jones, if they go trade for a high level starting 3-and-D player, that will change my opinion and that will move them up those rankings. But as currently constructed, I don't think, I mean, they don't have the depth right now. Like their bench is almost non-existent, and that's something that they have to address. And they also have some real defensive holes and defensive concerns. So we're also grading an incomplete team, which I think is the biggest thing here. I don't think it's fair to assign a grade to the Lakers yet. Let's see where they're at a week from now, a couple weeks from now. Do they make a trade? Who are the rest of their signings? But as currently constructed, I think it's fair to say they're probably not a championship caliber team. Like maybe they have a puncher's chance or a fringe chance. But I think, again, it's a little too premature to just write them off. But I also think the LeBron situation is really complicated. So I don't think that's happening yet. Benjamin Lloyd, how about coffee on the BAE 3-and-D? I love coffee. For those who have been listening to some of my talked about like cheaper wings, so I think make a lot of sense. Amir Coffee is one of those names. He's long, he's athletic. I think he trends a little bit more as a scorer than a defender, but and also more of a shooter than a defender. But I think he can defend. He's not like a liability on that end. So I would really like him as a BAE target. And you're also stealing him from the Clippers. So I think in this little like musical chairs game with the West teams, if you could always take an opponent, an opponent's rotation guy, even though it's more of like a back end rotation guy for them, I always think that's a win. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. Realistic wings to trade for besides Wiggins. Good with him, but don't want all eggs in that basket. So I could give you a list. It's not very encouraging. I talked about this list before, but I've gone through depth charts and contracts. And so formerly Drew Holiday was on this list, and maybe he still belongs on there just because I don't know what Portland's doing. MPJ, like two of the top three guys on my list were Holiday and MPJ, and they both got traded. Wiggins is the second guy. Keegan Murray's up there. Mathurin, though it looks like Indiana's trying to keep him. Derek Jones Jr. with the Clippers, though I think that would be complicated with those two sides trying to figure something out. Ochai Agbaji from Toronto, I really like him. And then like teardrop for sure down to like the Royce O'Neal, KCP, Matisse Thybulle level. With KCP, like he's probably the best of those three. Not even probably, like I would say he is the best of those three. It's just the contract is the thing that's a little tricky. I would not trade Rui for him. And you could, I guess, flip Gabe and Maxey. O'Neal and Thybulle, you could just do one of the expirings plus something, maybe like a second, and that would make some sense. So those are not the sexiest names. Like maybe we could throw Herb Jones in there. Like I think, let me be clear, I would love Herb Jones. I think he'd be a great fit. I just think the Lakers would probably have to trade Austin for him. And my understanding remains that they do not want to trade Austin. They view him as a pillar. They want to see what he looks like next to Luka next season. So I think that's the plan moving forward. So I think it's really what can you get for Rui plus a first or plus Dalton. And I think some of those names are really only Wiggins is the guy that I probably would trade Rui plus something for. Murray's an interesting one. Mathurin's an interesting one. But Murray's also more of like a 4 than a 3. So the Lakers are like, I don't think it's easy to find this type of wing. Like I in some ways it might have been easier to sign that player, but also there wasn't that player out there for their price range. So they're in a tough spot in terms of figuring this out. BT Kingsley, excuse me. Thank you for the super chat. Okay, if the Lakers are going to make me a trade going to have a short roster, we got to do it fast. Gabe, Maxey, Shake first for Wiggins, then add Coffee, Melton, Hayes, Paul, GP3, Dalton, and then then Dalton and a swap for Misi. I don't know if Gabe, Maxey, Shake, and a first gets you Wiggins. I think they would want, I've reported / shared what I've heard, which is that they've been asking for like the first and Dalton, which I think is an overpay for Wiggins. And I think they also want Rui too, because they want to remain competitive, and they obviously Rui's a better player than Gabe or Maxey. So I think that the Miami asking price needs to drop, as I've said before. I'm all for these other guys. I don't know if Jackson's a realistic backup anymore, just based on how things ended last season. But Coffee, Melton, GP3 or GP2, and Chris Paul. I mean, I think if you're going Melton, Gary Payton, and Chris Paul, I think you're going a little too small there. I think 2 of the 3 is okay. All 3, I think you're a little bit too small in the backup backcourt. And Dalton at a swap for Misi, I would do in a second. I think that's probably not enough for New Orleans. Alfredo, thank you for the super chat. Could Cam Whitmore be in play for the trade exception for LA with him floating around trade rumors and him being pushed down the Rockets rotation? I like that name. I think that could be the case. The one thing, and I've talked about this recently, is like with other good teams, especially in the West, in competition with one another, just think about like the inverse. If the Lakers had Cam Whitmore and he was like 10th or 11th in the pecking order in their rotation, wherever you want to put Whitmore in Houston's rotation, if the Lakers traded Cam Whitmore to Houston, as a Laker fan, like how would you feel about that? I don't think you'd be like pleased about that. So that's something that I think if I'm Houston, I have to weigh that of, I don't know if I want to trade him, period, because of his upside, because of his potential, because you need depth, and it feels like depth is as important as it's ever been in the NBA. But if I'm trading Cam Whitmore, I probably want to trade him east. I probably want to trade him to a bad team. I don't want to trade him to Cleveland. I don't want to trade him to Orlando. I don't want to trade him to New York. And of course, there's an element of like you got to weigh like the value and what you're getting versus the competitive elements of like not wanting to boost a competitor or a rival. But if I'm Houston, I wouldn't just want to like sell or give up on Cam Whitmore and give him to the Lakers because they're a threat. They're a competitor in the West, right? So if you're giving up a first, then that's probably a conversation that you have to really consider it. I don't know if the Lakers, like that might be something they would consider, but that it would probably have to be at that level of like, here's an unprotected first for Cam Whitmore, which is a lot to give up for the Lakers with only one bullet in the chamber with one first to trade. That is maybe something Houston considers. But if the Lakers are not, and it's more just like, oh, just, dump him on us, or we'll give you shake and we'll give you a swap or a second. Like, I just don't think that's enough. And really from Houston's perspective, I don't think it makes sense to give your competitor a potential player that could come back to haunt you. I think we've seen the Lakers do that, and they're still paying for the sins of giving Ivica Zubac to the Clippers. So I think you got to be careful with that. Young Claire, expect the Lakers to trade for a wing this week. It's tough to say in terms of, I don't have a clarity in terms of the timeline. I know they're looking. I know they're trying to make something happen. I think the NBA will collectively try to take a break on July 4th. Some years it works. Some years it doesn't. I believe KD signed on July 4th with the Warriors. So that, like, there have been some big July 4ths in the NBA. But I think if it doesn't happen by tomorrow, it probably doesn't happen until at least the weekend, if not into early next week. But again, don't have great clarity in terms of timing. Kevin, is Dillon Brooks possible? He would be nice. He is possible, and that is another name to probably include on my list. Looking up his contract just to make sure I'm being accurate here. He's got 2 years left, making 21.1 this year, 19.9 next year. So if you could flip Gabe and Maxey plus something to Phoenix for Dillon Brooks, I would do that. I would not give up a first. I would not give up Dalton Connect. The other issue here is that Phoenix doesn't control their own picks, so they're in a spot where they have no real incentive to tank. So I could see Phoenix being like, we want Dillon Brooks. We don't have much on the perimeter in terms of defense, and he's gives you a certain identity defensively. So I think for the Lakers, it would make a lot of sense. I don't know. Would you guys give up a first for him? I think it's probably fair value, maybe like a lottery protected first. But I think again, with what the Lakers like need, he checks a lot of the boxes, but I would still shoot a little bit high. Like I'd rather have Andrew Wiggins than Dillon Brooks. I also think there's some offensive concerns with just his shot selection and the way that he can sometimes call his own number. Nusky Fam, thank you for the super chat. What's ideal for you now with how the market looks for this Lakers roster? I still think Andrew Wiggins is the best wing available, realistically, like the best gettable wing with the Lakers assets. Of course, if you could get Herb Jones without giving up Austin, I would do that in a heartbeat. I'm trying to think of like what other young wings would make some sense. Those are kind of like my top two guys. And again, Herb Jones probably costs you Austin. I just don't think the Lakers want to do that. But I would say I would not want to give up DK and a first for Wiggins, but I would give up either one and then keep the other one. And if you could find a way to do Rui and Dalton for Wiggins, or Rui and you got to throw in like Maxey, but like Rui, Maxey, and Dalton for Wiggins, or Rui, Maxey, and a first for Wiggins, I would do either one of those trades. And then, of course, I would give up anything other than Luka, Austin, LeBron for Herb Jones. So, like if it's, because I think he's being like 12, 13. If it's Gabe, a first, Dalton, and like a swap, I would do that. I just think New Orleans wants more than that. Mitch Potter, thank you for the super chat. Yo Buha, great breakdown on Jake LaRavia. Good pickup at $6 million considering his upside, and wing defense is better than people think. His shooting is 100. Yeah, I got to say again, like I was familiar with Jake LaRavia because I know he's same agents as Austin, and I knew he was someone on the Lakers' radar. I wasn't sure what his market was going to be, how much he could potentially get. But after diving through the film over the last couple of days and talking to people and really studying his game and his fit, like I think if we're comparing, as crazy as it sounds, like comparing him to DFS, I think there's a lot of things he does better than DFS. Like I think he's just straight up better offensive player, better ball handler, better passer. I think more of a playmaker / creator, better shooter for sure. Shot 43% on threes last year, and can function off of DHOs, and good cutter and off-ball mover, relocator, all that stuff. So like offensively, it's a clear upgrade in my opinion. Defensively, I still think DFS is a better defender, but I think they have different defensive strengths. I think LaRavia is a little bit better on the perimeter with like moving his feet and keeping guys in front of him. And I thought fared pretty well against like wing defenders. I think that the area where DFS is clearly better than him is in terms of like rim protection, defensive rotations. DFS like is the perfect or one of the perfect like small ball bigs that, that 6'7", 6'8" forward who can scale up and guard 4s and 5s. I think DFS is better at that overall than LaRavia. But even looking at the film, LaRavia had some pretty good film against Jokic, Jaren Jackson, different bigs, fronting them, being disruptive, and really bothering them because he's got a really strong base. And so he's a guy who can front a big, and he's not just going to get pushed out of the way. Other than I had a clip in there with Giannis pushing him out of the way, but Giannis is Giannis. So like he's not a lockdown defender. He's not a wing stopper per se, but I think he holds up on that end a lot better than people think. And as long as he's guarding guys who aren't like blazing fast or athletic, I think he's going to do a pretty solid job on that end. And then again, I think he could actually scale up and guard some 4s and 5s in certain matchups. So yeah, I'm really high on the fit, and I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised. Jay Spares, thank you for the super chat. Total side note, does Rob Pelinka cut his own hair? This team is exhausting, man. I feel dirty that I'm happy about Ayton, but wasn't much out there. No clue on who cuts Rob's hair. I get you. Like, I get the general frustration with the fan base. I understand it. I've had my own frustrations with the Lakers in terms of how they operate, and just sometimes the lack of urgency and aggression and really going for it. I think that's been an issue for several years now. In terms of Ayton, I don't think he's the perfect big man. I don't think he's the perfect big man exactly for what they need. I still think Nick Claxton or Daniel Gafford would have been better fit with what the Lakers need and just next to Luka, but those guys are going to cost much more. Like, I don't know if the Lakers would have been able to get that wing that they might be able to get now with the remaining assets had they traded for those guys. So it's all cost benefit analysis. opportunity cost analysis. And I think for them, getting Ayton at $8 million and still being able to go get that wing was a big priority for them. So we'll see how it plays out. If they don't get the wing, or they get an underwhelming wing, then it's a different conversation that we'll be having in a week or two. But we shall see. What does it matter, bruh? That's a good one. Rui/Connect/first for Trey Murphy. Maybe add GV/Maxi and Gamble sitting on DeJounte till January with a couple role players to match salaries. They want way more than this for Trey Murphy. I don't know if you saw the reported asking price out of New Orleans, but they want a good veteran. They want a good young player, which I think we could debate where Rui and Dalton fit in that. I think they fit it like loosely, but I think the aspiration's higher than a Rui, higher than a Dalton. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they check those two categories. Then they want multiple firsts, and the Lakers only have one first to trade. And as I've said many, many times now, like, the Lakers swaps are just not considered to be valuable across the league, because the Lakers are considered to be a 50-plus win team for the next half decade with Luka Doncic and potentially a second superstar coming after LeBron leaves or retires. So people are not looking at the Lakers 2026 swap or their 2028 swap or their 2032 swap. Maybe 2032 is like the one that has the most value. But looking at some of these swaps in like the late 2020s, those are not considered to be good for a lot of these teams, because the Lakers are probably, like, the whole point of doing a pick swap is you think that team's going to be worse than you, and you want to bet against them and get their pick and hope it's like a lottery pick or something. The Lakers do not project like that. So they got the 4 pick swaps, really up to 5 if they're not putting the first on the table. But those are useless is like too strong of a word. I don't want to say that, but they're not that valuable. So it's not like, okay, here's a first and like 3 pick swaps. Like, I don't even think that is enough for Trey Murphy. So just because they want something for a player doesn't mean they're going to get it. We see teams all the time lower their asking prices. So I don't think they're getting like multiple firsts for Trey Murphy and a good veteran and a good young player. Like, maybe they do, but that's a lot to ask for him. But I think if the combination is Rui and Dalton, I think they would lean more on the picks in terms of like wanting more picks. And I think it would have to be better players going out for Trey Murphy to offset the Lakers only having 1 pick. So I think, honestly, in both categories, they don't have the players to get Trey Murphy, and they also don't have the picks to get Trey Murphy. Now, the conversation changes if you put Austin on the table. If it's Austin and Dalton and a first, now I think New Orleans considers that. But for the Lakers, I think they would view that as an overpay, and I don't think they would want to do that trade. So I don't think they have enough for Trey Murphy. In terms of DeJounte, based on how much they gave up, and the Dyson Daniels, selling low on Dyson Daniels, having him as a throw-in is really costing New Orleans right now. I don't think Gabe and Maxi gets you DeJounte. I think just from a pride perspective, they don't want to sell low on him. And I guess you're talking about a bigger trade here. Bay and Alvarado are gettable, but I think this just ultimately comes down to the Lakers not having the requisite draft capital. Anwar Austin for Jalen Green. I appreciate the super chat, and it is a $20 one, which is a big one. So I'm just gonna say I'm not a big Jalen Green guy. I'll be diplomatic here with this one. I think Austin's just straight up better than Jalen Green. And for as bad as we could criticize Austin's Minnesota series, and I've criticized it, his Minnesota series, he looked like an all-star compared to how bad Jalen Green was in the first round series against the Warriors. And I just think, like, and even if you want to talk yourself into the potential of Jalen Green and like this theoretical upside with him, he's not a good defender either. So I think you are recreating a lot of the same issues with Austin and Luka defensively that you would still have with Jalen Green and Luka defensively. So I would not do Austin for Jalen Green, and I don't think the Lakers would do Austin for Jalen Green. But if you're a Jalen Green guy, look, I know he's been a big prospect since high school. He's had like a following and a fan base and stuff. So if you're one of his fans, like I get it, but I just think we're starting to run out of time for him to actualize his potential. Chase, thank you for the super chat. Does Miles Bridges make any sense since the Hornets want to go younger? That is an interesting name. And it is a name that has been tied to the Lakers in the past, in part because of the Clutch Sports connection, though I don't remember. No, he's still with Clutch Sports. Make it 25 this year, 22.8 next year. So also in line with the 2027 plan, which, yeah, I mean, he could make some sense. I mean, he's a guy I would consider a first round pick for. I think, to be completely transparent, like there are some optics issues that understandably are concerning, and some, some of the stuff with his off court past is something that if you trade for him, he's going to be asked about it. You're going to have to get out ahead of it and address why you're comfortable trading for him. I think that's a real conversation, and deservedly so. I'm not not inserting myself into that situation at all. I'm just purely like commenting that is a factor that teams weigh, and it is a factor with potentially trading for him, that he does have a troubling off-court history. But I think he would make a lot of sense for the Lake. Like, I mean, I guess you could put him into that Andrew Wiggins, Herb Jones conversation in terms of like best two-way wings available. I think it's just a matter of like what does Charlotte want to do, because they trade for Colin Sexton, and I mean, I would trade Yusuf Nurkic for Colin Sexton too, especially if I'm getting a second round pick. But feels like they're kind of think they could go for it, though they also did trade away Mark Williams and Nick Richards over the past couple of trade cycles. So I don't know. Charlotte's a weird one. I'm not ever quite sure what they're doing, but I think Bridges is available for the right price. So maybe is it Rui, Maxey, and a first, something like that? Does that get you him? I mean, I think he's pretty good, and I think he'd be a good fit. I don't know if he's quite to the level defensively you'd want. I would put Wiggins and Herb Jones above him defensively, but I think he's a more talented offensive player than either one of those, at least this current version of Wiggins. So he's an interesting one. I like that as a suggestion. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. Would you do a trade of Rui plus 1 second for Brooks? Yes, I would do that. I don't know if Phoenix would do that, but if they would, then yeah, I would do that. And really, I think Rui versus Brooks is close. I just think more so for what the Lakers need defensively, I think Brooks makes a bit more sense. Cypod, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, do you think Ayton is the best center since Marc Gasol? Also, would you agree Houston, Dallas, OKC, Denver are better than the Lakers next season? I considered AD a center. I know that was a divisive topic within the Laker fan base, and if he should be at the 4 or at the 5. I know he considers himself more of a 4, but I would contend that AD is the Lakers' best center over the last few years. If you're going to put AD aside and not include him in the mix, yeah, I would say he's the best center since Marc Gasol, and I think he has higher upside than Marc Gasol based on where Marc Gasol was at that stage of his career. I guess you could throw Andre Drummond in. That was another polarizing player during his tenure with the Lakers. But if we're going through the list, it's pretty uninspiring of Damian Jones and Thomas Bryant and DeAndre Jordan and Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood and even Trey Jemison and Christian Coloco and Jay Huff, although Jay Huff is the current version of Jay Huff would be near the top of that list. Yeah, I mean, I guess over the last few years, it's been a pretty disappointing crop of centers for the Lakers, a revolving door of miscast vet minimum guys. But I mean, certainly Ayton is the most talented and skilled, I think, since at least Gasol, if not, because again, Gasol wasn't who Gasol like used to be, or even who he was a couple years earlier in Toronto. So I would say for sure. I mean, he's, I think on paper, the most skilled and talented center of the LeBron AD era outside of course, AD. Like you say more skilled and talented than JaVale or Dwight. Now, can he have the same impact as those guys? Is a totally different conversation, but this guy's been a walking 16 and 10. Like it's nothing to scoff at. And again, Dwight was at a different point of his career. In terms of the West pecking order, I would put Minnesota in here, and I would take out Dallas. And I'm taking out Dallas because they don't have Kyrie. And I still think for as big as they are, for as good as they could be defensively, for as athletic as they are, and just the size and the depth, I still think they're lacking in on-ball playmaking and shot creation. I do think D'Lo could be a good fit there, and he'll be supported by a lot of size and athleticism and defense. But I still think there's a bit of a ceiling there, and they would need a healthy Kyrie. If they had a healthy Kyrie, I think it's fine to put them in this mix, and they're a real threat to come out of the West if Cooper Flagg is as good as advertised, which I think he will be. If they don't have healthy Kyrie, I still think in like a half court setting, like I like Derek Lively, I like Daniel Gafford, I like PJ Washington. They are very AD dependent, and to a lesser extent, like Cooper Flagg dependent in terms of shot creation. And like, I just kind of, I almost view them a little bit like Houston last year, where they could overachieve in the regular season. They could be a really good team, but when it comes to their half court offense and how they're going to function late in close games against really good teams, I have some concerns until I see Kyrie's back and he's back to full strength. So again, with a healthy Kyrie, I think they should belong in this mix. Without a healthy Kyrie, and he's not expected back till February or March, and even then, usually the ramp up process takes weeks or months. Like in terms of once they return, that's where I have some concerns with them. So Dallas next year, I think, could easily be in the top of the West mix with Houston and Denver and OKC. But I think right now, without Kyrie, that's just a huge. I mean, he's their second best player. Like that's a huge blow to that team. And unless Cooper Flagg is like a top 30 player or a top 50, like he could be a top 50 player, but I think if he's like a top 30 player and they exceeds expectations like that, then maybe it's a different conversation. But I would swap out Dallas, put in Minnesota, and then those are the four teams I think you could argue are better than the Lakers. I think Golden State and the Clippers are also in the mix, but there's some age-related questions with them that Lakers have their own age-related questions with LeBron, but I think Luka, I have more confidence in Luka compared to Kawhi or Steph. I'll just say that. Undefeated 36, thank you for the super chat. If LeBron gets traded, how long before Bronny gets cut or moved? I don't have an answer for this. I would assume as of right now that Bronny probably is included in a potential LeBron trade, but I know people are not going to believe this, so I almost don't want to say it, but I think the Lakers, they genuinely liked Bronny. And I know we don't have to go down that road. I really don't want to, but I think with the progress he showed last year in the G League and even late in the season with some of the reps that he got in certain games, I could see them potentially keeping him if they trade LeBron. I don't think it's LeBron gets traded and they're like waiving Bronny. He has a guaranteed contract for the next 2 years also. So if the Lakers waive him, they would eat that money. It's not a lot of money, but still, that's something you got to weigh with the cap situation. Like he's making less than the typical veteran minimum for what that's worth. But I would assume he's probably going with LeBron somewhere, but I don't think that's a guarantee for sure. And we talked to him today sort of about that. And he said he had a friend call him asking if he was going to get traded with his dad, if his dad gets traded. And he was like, I'm just hearing about all this. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm staying out of it. So I actually could see him staying a Laker at least through his contract. Like maybe he eventually gets traded or is a throw-in in a trade or something, but I don't think they're just going to day one of LeBron gone, just like cut him. Wonka, thank you for the super chat. Lakers got the best center in free agency. I agree. I think there is a conversation for Ayton versus Turner, but I'd rather have Ayton at $8 million than Turner at 26. I also would rather have Ayton for his skill set and what the Lakers need compared to Turner and his skill set. I think Ayton's a better rebounder. He's a better finisher around the basket. And those are two key areas the Lakers needed to address. They have struggled on the glass. They have struggled with the interior finishing, especially with the non-Jackson bigs that they've had over the last few years. So I think whether you think Ayton or Turner is better, I think the value with Ayton and the skill set of what the Lakers need makes more sense. Dylan, thank you for the super chat. Lakers sign and trade for Malik Monk. Sacramento looking for a trade partner, maybe Gabe or Vando. Thoughts on a Shake Milton plus pick swap for Nick Richards. I would do the second one. I mean, that's one of my favorite fake trades is Shake Milton for Nick Richards. Phoenix saves a couple $1 million, which doesn't sound like much, but they are a second apron team. So every million has an exponential, multiplier effect. So like 2 million, I would have to look at their cap sheet, but that could be like at 8 million, 10 million, $12 million savings just by saving a couple $1 million. So that could make some sense for Phoenix. And then you potentially throw in a second or a pick swap or something to get Nick Richards. With Monk, to kind of go back to like the MPJ question that I got a bit earlier, I like Monk as a sixth man, and I think he could help the Lakers. I just think they have greater needs right now. And I don't think Gabe or Vando I'll say Vando straight up. You'd have to be Vando in a first, and that's like neutral value right now. So unless Sacramento really likes Vando, and I'm sure there are some teams that do, but he's making mid-level money for the next 3 years, and he has not produced like a mid-level player or been available like a mid-level player. So just Vando's contract in every conversation I've had has just not been regarded as a positive contract. Gabe is an expiring, so that's a little bit of a different story. You could talk maybe Sacramento into like the Gabe Monk swap, where Gabe is a more defensive guard and he still provides some offensive spark when he gets hot. And we know he can go through the stretches where he is hot and he's scoring a lot, but a bit streakier and inconsistent compared to a player like Monk. But then he is a defensive upgrade. So that one's a little bit more interesting. I would assume the Lakers have to throw in something for Monk. I think just because Monk's available doesn't mean you're going to be able to just steal him from Sacramento. Though I will say Sacramento, we never know what Sacramento's doing. You never know what they're thinking. They don't have the best process sometimes. So maybe I think anything's on the table when dealing with them. Mitch Potter, thank you for the super chat. I'm confused why fans have blamed LBJ for holding the front office's feet to the fire, as if Luka would be fine punting the season prior to an extension. So let's just get into 2027 plan. So I think you're sort of referencing this. My understanding, and it is a fine line, but my understanding is the Lakers want to compete. They want to put the best team around Luka. They want to go for it. They want to win the title, but they're also trying to keep that long-term, and I guess depending on how, like medium-term flexibility, because it's a couple years from now. I wouldn't call that long-term. I wouldn't call that short-term. I would say like medium-term, at least in like NBA terms. They want to keep that medium-term flexibility for if Giannis becomes available. What happens with Jokic could be a free agent in 2027. Like they want that flexibility of one of those two guys, or maybe someone else wants out. And we see sometimes these things move pretty quickly with stars, and with these big salaries, you want the flexibility to be able to pull off a trade. So like, for example, if say there's like a $45 million star becomes available right now, the Lakers could put Rui, Gabe, Maxey, and like Shake on the table with a first, or maybe it's Dalton and a first, and get in the mix for that player. But it would be a little bit easier if they had some more mid-sized salaries, some more expiring contracts. Like you want to have that flexibility. But at the same time, sometimes trying to have that flexibility could come at the expense of the current roster and how competitive you are. So I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, in terms of compete now, contend now, go for it now, while also having, doing it more so with shorter term contracts. And, I think Ayton almost exemplify, like Ayton and LaRavia exemplify this, I think, in two different ways, where with LaRavia, it's a bet on former first round pick with certain pedigree, shown some flashes of potential in Memphis and Sacramento. They like his skill set. They think he could wear multiple hats for them. They think he could be a key bench wing. And they're like, we're taking this gamble on him, but he's probably going to outproduce this contract. We think he's going to outproduce Dorian Finney-Smith as soon as this season, but if not this season, next season. And then even if, he hits, we'll still have some flexibility with bird rights, or just even using an exception on him in 2027 when he becomes a free agent. With Ayton, it's probably more of a one-year deal. I would assume that regardless of if it's him staying in LA or him going to another team, he probably opts out next year and is going to outproduce that $8 million contract. But that's another short-term situation where maybe you can re-sign Ayton next year, or if he opts out, or maybe things don't go great, but if he's on the books, it's still an $8 million expiring contract, which you can throw into a trade or potentially even waive if you really needed to go down that road. So I think for them, they're looking at like, how can we take some young upside swings on players? Like with Ayton, it's more of an established player. With Laravia, it's more of a swing, but we feel like Ayton's an upgrade over Hayes. Laravia can be an upgrade over DFS. And we also have this contractual flexibility. So I think it's a tightrope that they're trying to walk here. I think it's more likely to lend itself to more flexibility down the road, and maybe not the highest upside team or the best current team. And that's where I could see fans being frustrated, and I get it, and I err more on that side of it. But in terms of LeBron holding the feet to the fire, like I don't really think I can't blame LeBron for wanting to have the best team possible now. Like he might only play 1 or 2 more years. So if LeBron was content with the roster, I think that would, like, I'd have almost an issue of how LeBron feels about the end of his career and how competitive he is and how motivated he is, right? Like I think it's speaking to his motivation to still win that 5th ring. Now, how he goes about it sometimes and releasing the statement and the stuff today, like we can maybe quibble with that, and I think sometimes it's a little bit more counterproductive than actually effective. But I think he's made his feelings known that he is not content with them just sitting on the sidelines for 2026 or 2027. But to be clear, I don't think the Lakers are punting on the next 2 seasons. That's been the feedback I've gotten the last couple of days talking to people. Like they're not content with being a first round exit team. Like they want to compete, they want to contend. They're just trying to walk this fine line of doing so with shorter term deals, which again does limit the way you build a roster, which in and of itself might just be a limiting factor that ultimately limits how good they can be this season. Jean-Pierre, thank you for the super chat. Do you do Rui and Gabe with the first for Wiggins and seconds back? I would do that. Yeah. I said any variation of Rui plus a first or Rui plus Dalton, I would do. I just would not do both of the primary assets of Dalton and the first. But yeah, I would do that. What does it matter, bro? Can we start to consider AR off the bench takes us to the next level? It's dumb that the combo is just start him / trade him. Champs have to pay for good players across top 8 guys, not just 5. Find 2 starting caliber wings. I think the bigger issue here, and I talked about this yesterday on stream, is like once you move a guy to the bench, there are exceptions, right? Like Manu Ginobili is the greatest exception of all. But for the most part, like guys take perception hits. It affects the way that you're viewed across the league. It affects your next contract. And for Austin, who is functionally in a contract year, he's going to opt out next summer and sign a new deal with the Lakers or someone else. He'd prefer it's with the Lakers, but he's going to get that 30+ million. I have a hard time seeing him being cool with coming off the bench. And I have a hard time with the Lakers, who have positioned him as the number 3, as a pillar, as a potential pillar with Luka moving forward. Like those things are not congruent. That does not align with the way that they've talked about Austin, the way that they valued him in trades. Like they talk about him as a future all-star. And again, with maybe the exception of Manu Ginobili off the top of my head, and like, I guess, prime Jamal Crawford, prime Lou Williams, bench players are rarely in that all. And even then, I think Jamal and Lou were more like fringe. I don't think they were ever seriously given all-star consideration. Maybe a couple years they were like fringe guys, but with the exception of Manu, it almost just never happens that way. And even Manu came in as a decorated international player who had Olympic success, and it was just clear, like, I mean, I'll just say, like, there's a reason why James Harden was traded from OKC, and like that whole situation played out. And part of that was on OKC, but like Harden didn't want to come off the bench, and he was not only did he not want to take a pay cut, which they were trying to force him to take a few $1 million pay cut. It was also, we're going to start Thabo Cephalosha over you, which in retrospect looks like a ridiculous. And I'm not saying he's Harden. I'm not saying he's going to become Harden, but I think that from an ego perspective, from what he has proven so far at the NBA level, this dude just averaged 25-5 last year. Like, there are no 25-5 guys coming off the bench. And I know that part of that was pre-Luka trade and things changed post-Luka trade, but I think it's much easier said than done to just be like, bench Austin when he has been elevated to a certain status. And we can debate whether he should have been or how the Lakers have handled things, but I just don't see that happening currently. Like, I think at that point, and I agree with you, it shouldn't just be a start versus trade him thing, but I almost think at that point it becomes more of a just, if you're not going to keep him as a starter and play him a certain amount, you might as well just trade him, because then I think he's probably leaving. Like, if you move him to the bench, I would be surprised if he stays next summer. I'll just say that. And that's not source. That's just my read on the situation. I think someone is going to pay Austin to be a $30+ million a year starter. And if the Lakers are benching him, I think that's probably pushing him out the door longer term. But I agree with your premise in general. I just think, again, as if they're keeping him, they're probably starting him. John, thank you for the super chat. Braun were to ask for a trade. Would Braun for OG and Mitch Robinson make sense for both teams? Then Rui, Dalton for Wiggins. Thoughts? I think for New York, it makes some... for the Lakers, that's one of the better deals you could probably get for LeBron. I don't know if there's any draft capital in that. Maybe they throw in a pick or something for optics, or just to make it more valuable. We could debate that. But I think that's one of the better trades you could do. For New York, though, it does... You are like really going for it over the next year or two. And I think they have a nice group around Brunson and Cat. I think Mitch Robinson is expendable, but OG, I mean, he's their third highest paid player, and you could argue their third best player, third or fourth. So, I mean, of course it's for LeBron, but it's probably like you could talk me into it for both sides. Rui, Dalton for Wiggins. That's just a matter of, obviously, if Miami would do that, or I would assume they'd want the pick over Dalton, but you could haggle on that one. And if you do that, then we go back to the last question, and maybe is Austin coming off the bench, or are you bringing Wiggins off the bench, or how are you handling that situation? Because I think Ayton would start over Mitch Robinson right now as constructed. Probably be Ayton, OG, maybe it'd be OG, Wiggins, Austin, Luka. I guess that works from a positional standpoint. So yeah, that's a pretty good starting group. And then you have Mitch Robinson off the bench, LaRavia, Gabe. Like, you still have some holes on the bench that you got to address. DJ Jovan, what's the going price for Herb Jones? Is there a deal that could be made without including Reeves? Also, do you think the Lakers look at Ben Simmons? I don't think the Lakers look at Ben Simmons. They're also running out of roster spots quietly, especially if they use the BAE. They're going to be pushing up there. So they might only be able to do like one or two more signings. And I also think if they're doing a trade, like, that is potentially a factor. Let me just checking on my phone to make sure I'm not missing anything. All right. In terms of Herb Jones, I kind of talked about it earlier. So just to summarize it quickly, I think you probably have to put Austin in. I have a hard time. If you're putting Dalton in the first and maybe Rui, that's the base. Maybe you get close, but even if you're throwing in a pick swap or two, I don't know if that's enough. Joe Davis, LBJ trade with Mavs, could net PJ, Clay, Gaff plus first. Worth it. Yeah, I talked about that earlier. That's probably like the base of it. You could even get maybe a Max Christie or a Caleb Martin or a Najee Marshall. That still works within the constraints of the salaries. Is it worth it? I think it's only worth it if LeBron demands out, and that's your best trade. Like, I think if you're the Lakers, I would only trade LeBron if he demands out, and also he has some say over that, right? Because he's got the no trade clause. Then I trade him for the best package possible within the constraints of he's going to want only X amount of teams. Is it 2 teams, 3 teams, 5 teams, something like that? Then whoever has the best package, I trade for that. If it's Dallas, then sure. A Chris 95. Buha, big fan, man. How legit is the Al Horford stuff? I wouldn't mind him as a backup C. I talked about it at the top, but you might have missed it, so I will rehash. My understanding is it was legit in terms of the mutual interest, but it was more so if they didn't get Lopez, if they didn't get Ayton, and I think now it's looking more. It was already the buzz when free agency started immediately was that Horford was going to Golden State. But there's been some hold up there. I think he wanted to see the LA situation. Now that it's looking like Ayton's not only the starter, but he's probably going to be a 30-plus minute a night guy. Horford would have to take a pay cut and probably a role cut. I think with Golden State, he could either be a placeholder starter or play a little bit more off the bench and also get paid more. And same state taxes. So I think with the latest intel I've gotten, it looks like he's going to Golden State. Ooh to the we, call me crazy. We weren't that far off with our core. Bad matchup against Minnesota when we had no center, but end of season, OKC had no answer for Luka. I'm with you, and I think the thing that I struggle with the Lakers is we saw two sides of it, right? So we saw the 50-win team, 3 seed, with some statement wins against Boston and New York and Indiana and Minnesota and Denver and OKC and the Clippers and the Warriors. And like they basically beat every good team at least once last season, I guess with the exception of Cleveland, who they played earlier in the season. But they beat at least, like you saw the potential against every good team at least once. Most of those wins were second half of the season. Most of those wins were post-Luka trade. And you saw this potential with them. Then they go to the playoffs and they get smacked, and like a couple of those games were obviously close. They could have won game 3 or game 4. Game 1 and game 5 are decisive, and then game 2 got a little shaky there in the 4th. But that team looked so far off from the team we saw in the regular season that like one thing I've really struggled with in evaluating the Lakers over the last few weeks has just been like, which team were they? And I think that's if they were the team in the regular season, then that's a team that I do think they could be the second best team in the West with the right couple moves here to close out the roster. The team in the first round, that is more of like a play-in level team. And I don't know which one's more legit. Like really the playoffs are where your flaws are exposed, your weaknesses are exposed, and they got exposed for the lack of size and the lack of depth. Right now, they added a quality starting center on a bargain contract. They're still not deep. I would contend, you look at the starting 5, that's a good starting 5. You get to the bench, now it's Gabe, it's Laravia, it's Dalton, it's Vando, it's Goodwin. We're already a little shaky there. So I think they need to nail a couple more signings. They need to nail someone for that BAE. And they need to get another vet minimum signing, valuable signing or 2. And then I still think they need to do a trade for a starting wing and shuffle up the starting group a little bit. But I think I've really struggled with just which Lakers team was the real team, right? And I get if you want to lean on the larger sample size, which was the regular season, but there's also this like element of playoff basketball typically means more, reveals more. And I think it revealed a lack of continuity, which I think will be improved upon. It revealed a lack of size, which they're trying to improve on, and a lack of depth, which I think that's the one that I'm still a little concerned with in terms of their ability to fill out the roster and have depth that's on the par with OKC or Houston or some of these other teams at the top of the league. So I tread more optimistic with them, but I want to like. I think a big swing factor for me is if they make a trade or not. I think if they just stand pat with free agency signings, I don't think they're quite good enough. Adam Reyes, is Thomas Bryant available? He is available, and I think he'd be fine as a backup big. He would not be my first choice. I'd rather have Al Horford. I'd rather have Nick Richards. Precious Achua, it's probably close. Probably lean Achua, but yeah, I would lean Achua. Although Thomas Bryant played more in the playoffs. I think there's some better names out there than Thomas Bryant, but if he's like the worst you do, that's fine. Mitch Potter, Giddey will get $30 million. How is AR not worth that? I mean, I've talked a lot about AR. I know he's a divisive guy, but I'm not a betting person, but if I was a betting person, I would bet a lot of money on AR getting that money. Rama's Aviation. Hey, Buha, I know everyone is saying that we need a better starting wing to likely replace Rui, but do the Lakers themselves think that too? My understanding is yes. Like, they entered this offseason with two needs in their opinion, or really three, like two centers, a starting level center and a good backup, and then a upgrade on the three. Because I think the thing here is like Rui is not really a wing, and wing is like a loose term. It depends, is a wing like a 2-3, a 3-4, just a 3? Like how, we could characterize or classify that in different ways. But Rui to me is more of a power forward, more of a big wing, a power wing. And the issue for the Lakers is they still have LeBron, who's a power wing, Luka, who's at his best as a help defender and playing off of the ball, and Vando, can defend wings, but he's also more of a 4 offensively, and there's some like he almost has some limitations because of his offensive game, and then Laravia is also kind of a 3.5/4. So I think there's a surplus there of power forward / big wing defenders, and not big like. There are big wings that are versatile defensively, and then there are big wings who are not. And I think the Lakers have more big wings who are not than versatile guys. So my understanding is conversations I've had with people around the team, yes, they do view that starting 3-and-D spot as the biggest need. And if they don't address that, again, I think there's a real limitation there to their defense and their ceiling. Crumpet. When can the Lakers non-guarantee Shake's money? July 20th is the deadline to waive Shake Milton. So they have 18 days. Jay, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, would you trade AR and Dalton for Herb Jones? And Misi, I'm brainstorming ideas. If I'm trading AR to New Orleans, I would rather get Trey Murphy. I don't know if that would be enough to get Trey Murphy. It's an interesting trade. I think New Orleans would want more, to be completely honest. And I don't think the Lakers would want to give more. You could talk me into it from like a value perspective, because you might be getting your center of the future in Misi, and then Herb Jones is an elite defender. A couple other things I've talked about recently with Herb Jones that scare me. He's played 4 years, 2 good healthy years, 1 okay healthy year, 1 bad healthy year. So there's a little bit of an injury history there, more troubling than Austin. And the big thing for me is the shooting. He's had 3 subpar shooting seasons, 2 below average, 1 really bad, which was actually last year, and then 1 really good shooting season. So I think while my point is, I think he gets treated as a 3-and-D wing, but I think right now he's much more of a defensive wing than a two-way player or a reliable 3-and-D wing. So like with some guys, we label them 3-and-D. There's not much D there. They're not good defenders. I think with Herb Jones, it's the opposite, where people call him a 3-and-D wing, but the shot is pretty unreliable. And I think the shot quality would be better with Luka than anyone he's ever played with in New Orleans. But we've seen when guys can't shoot that well, there is a limitation to their utility and their fit. So I have some issues with or concerns with that. Trey Murphy, I think I would do the Trey Murphy version of this. Herb Jones, I think it's a little bit more borderline for me. Will Brotherson or Brotherson, new nickname, Domin Layton. Sorry. I like it. It's I'm all for nicknames. So that's good with me. Appreciate you. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. Shake plus Maxi plus Gabe plus first for Brooks and Richards. Thoughts? That's interesting. I probably would just not want to give up. I think for me, my barrier to entry is if I'm giving up the first, I want like a bona fide, legit starter. You could argue Brooks is that type of player. I think I'm a little lower than consensus on Brooks because I think Brooks can be harmful offensively. I think the antics can sometimes be harmful, but that maybe gets overblown a little bit. That's only certain matchups, certain teams, certain players, including LeBron, who he'd be playing with theoretically in this scenario. I think my bigger issue with Brooks is I think he lacks self-awareness for his skill set offensively. And I think there are times he can hijack his team's offense, both in Memphis and in Houston, and just have these. I think we saw it last year. I forgot which game against Houston, but there was a stretch there in the second half where he just started to call his own number, and it's the ISO Dylan Brooks game. And he'll, once out of every 4 times he does that, make the shots and like it'll look good and he'll swing a game. But the other 3 times he'll go like 2 for 6, and all of a sudden you were up 8 and now you're up 1 or you're down 4 or something like that. And I just think he has these like really negative swings with his offensive game that can be really harmful. That for me lowers his value because I think the biggest thing with role players is self-awareness and playing within the team scheme. And I think sometimes he departs from that too much. And I don't think his defense is good enough to offset that, in my opinion. But maybe I'm a little bit too low on him. I would do this for a swap. I would even consider maybe Dalton in it instead of the first, but I think the first might be a little too rich for my blood. But I like the general, like you are trading technically for a starting wing and a backup center. I just would want someone personally better than Dylan Brooks. But I like where your head's at, and you're really not giving up much from the rotation. Young Claire, chances we get a true 3-and-D via trade, Rui gone. I think there are ways to keep Rui out of it, and that might even be the best case scenario is if you could flip Gabe and Maxey for, and look, the last trade, you get Dylan Brooks, you keep Rui. Maybe that's the best case scenario. Chances they get a 3-and-D wing via trade. I think they're going to get one. I think it's just the degree of how, just a matter of how good that player is. So I don't know, 55% chance, I'd say tentatively that they get a 3-and-D wing via trade. I mean, you said true 3-and-D wing, that maybe I lowered it a little bit. I don't know. But I don't think Rui's 100% gone or guaranteed to be gone. I think there are variations where they get to keep him and move him to the bench. Johnny T, Jovan, how about Keon Ellis to the Lakers? Decent backup who plays really good defense. Seems like the Kings haven't given him a new contract. I would love Keon Ellis. I would prefer Keon Ellis over DeAnthony Melton, over Gary Payton II. I've never really considered him available. That's why I haven't really mentioned him. But if the Kings botch that and don't retain him, then I would do that. I like that. All right. Dive in. Oh, I see I got one from DeKeys. I don't see a question. But if you follow up with your question, I will... RS30 says, bruh, we have Luka and Braun and Ayton and AR. We don't need shooting. I would slightly disagree here because I think you need shooting from that fifth spot, which Rui provides for what that's worth. But I think in general, the Lakers need shooting just for bench-centric lineups. Like I think they had this roster imbalance last year where they had a very offensive-centric starting group, and then they had a very defensive-centric defensive group, and they never quite figured out the optimal balance between the two. Like ideally, you have a bunch of two-way guys and a bunch of guys who could shoot, a bunch of guys who can defend, and that's like your role players. But I would say that I would make a distinction here where I don't think they need like scorers. I think they have enough offensive firepower with Luka, Braun, Ayton, and AR. Again, any one of those four can go for 15 plus, 20 plus on a given night. And obviously at least 2 or 3 of those are going to go for 20 plus every single night. But I think you need shooting because you need spacing. And there are ways to create spacing without shooting. But I would contend that offensively, shooting is arguably the most valuable thing to have around star players, which the Lakers have at least 2, if not 3, depending on how you view Austin. So I do think they need shooting around them. Legend of Experiment says, we are way better than Denver, Houston, OKC, Mavs with Ayton. I strongly disagree on the OKC front. I think OKC is the best team in the West and in their own tier. I think they're better than Dallas, and I would still put Denver and Houston above them. But if you wanted to put them in the same tier, I don't necessarily disagree. But I think Houston, like Denver and Houston both go more than 7 deep, and I think the Lakers arguably only go 7, maybe 8 deep. So I think both teams are deeper. I think both teams, I mean, Denver just pushed OKC to 7. They have a championship pedigree with that, most of that core. Jokic is the best player in the world still, in my opinion. So it's close. Like I think it's going to be a matter of degrees in the West. Jarian, I swear if we trade for Herb Jones or Drew, then we would be contenders. I agree, especially if that's like the 5th starter. Sky Falcon 5, do you think Kamara would be cheaper to get than Herb? This is wild. Kamara might be more expensive than Herb. I think it's close, but I've said this before, and I'll probably get aggregated on it because I always get aggravated. I get aggravated and aggregated on stuff that I already said, and then I'll repeat it, and then for some reason that gets aggregated. But I've heard Portland wants 2 firsts for Kamara, so or values him at that level of 2 firsts. So that's probably similar to Herb. Maybe Herb's a little bit higher, but they're close. B, how would you feel about Boucher for the Lakers? I think for the BAE, I'd be fine with that. Just the thing with Boucher is he's not a real backup center. Like he's a stretch big, and he is a good shot blocker, solid rim protector, not a good rebounder, and I think in general can be pushed around by some of the bigger bigs. So if you think about, you're playing Houston, he's going up against Steven Adams. You're playing Denver, he's going up against Jonas Valanciunas. You're playing even OKC, they'll stagger their bigs. Now he's going up against Hartenstein. Like those guys are just too big for him and too physical, too strong. They're going to push him around. So I think with Boucher, I would be okay with it if there was another big in the mix. I think he can be the backup 5 in certain matchups, but I think he's more of a backup 4. Maybe there's certain matchups where you have a backup 5, he's at the 4, and maybe Vando's playing a little bit less, or Vando's playing more at the 3. But I wouldn't want him as the primary backup 5 because I do think there are some real limitations with him. Augusto says, Jovan, would you trade Vando, Gabe, Max, first round pick, and a second round pick for Drew Holiday? Yes, I would. Darth Dan, Cody Martin on a min. I like that. Let's see what he did last year. What his shot 11% on threes in Phoenix in 14 games, 28% overall. His shooting has declined over the last 3 years, 21%, which is insane for a wing. 31%, 29%. So the shooting's a bit streaky, but you could do worse than him on. I'd do him on a vet min. Mac, Gabe, first pick swap for Neesmith. I think they'd want more, but I would do that. Let me make sure I all caught up. Okay. Dickies, I'll go to you first. Trade AR, Rui, and Dalton for Bam and Wiggins. I don't think this works. So the issue here is the finances. Bam and Wiggins together make almost $80 million. I think they might even be over 80. So, or around 80. So the Lakers just don't have the contracts to get there. This is where, again, one thing I've talked about with Austin that I think is, in my opinion, it's kind of combining what I think the Lakers are going to do with what I also think is just the best thing to do, which would be ride out this season with Austin. And ideally he continues to improve, at least puts up the same level of production, but ideally becomes a better player, better production, has a better showing in the playoffs. Next year gets his 30, 35, 37, whatever $1 million contract for multiple years. And if you're still not sold on the fit, maybe you lose in the first or second round, or you see some cracks in the fit with Luka and Austin and just the infrastructure there, Then you go into 2026, 27, ahead of the famous or infamous 2027 offseason. And that season, you end up flipping Austin, who's still going to be valuable on that contract. And you now have some more optionality with the type of player you can get back. Because again, like if we're talking pure value, you'd have to throw in something else, I think, like probably at least the first to make this a more valuable trade for Miami. But like there's an issue here of just Austin making 14 million where like you can't trade him for a 50 something million Bam and a 28 or so million Wiggins, or if he's making 30, 35, 40, all of a sudden Austin becomes a big trade piece that you could eventually flip at some point if you're not sold on the fit. So I get that like he has, in some ways, obviously he has more value on a lesser deal, but he's functionally an expiring contract. He's going to opt out whether he's on the Lakers or a different team. He's opting out next summer. He's not opting in. And he's going to he's going to test free agency and he's going to see what contracts are out there for him. So teams aren't necessarily looking to take on Austin and that potential risk of him being a flight risk and signing somewhere else next summer. So I think you could almost talk me into Austin having more value in 2026, 27, similar to Bane being under contract for multiple years, having a set salary. I think there's a chance that version of him is more valuable. RGN Cal 4, what about Marcus Smart? I think the biggest issue with Marcus Smart is just the contract. I want to say he's expiring 21 million, if I'm not mistaken. Pulling it up now. Yeah, 21.6 million. So you could get there with Maxey and Gabe. I wouldn't give up a first or Dalton for him. If you could get him without doing that, I'm all for it. And that's probably like, I think it's a realistic one that the Lakers could shoot for. He's not at the top of my list. I'd rather have Wiggins. I'd rather have Herb Jones. To go back to an earlier question, I'd rather have Miles Bridges. But if Marcus Smart's the best you can do, I'd rather have Dylan Brooks. I think those two are similar, but I do think at this point Brooks is the better player. Oi da boy. Sup, Daman Buha. Is Ayton a good screener for Luka? He is. He is a good screener. He's a big body, 7 foot, 250. He is a good screener. I think some of the questions with the motor and stuff, I think apply more to playing with physicality in the defensive end. I think on the offensive end, he's typically playing hard and motivated. Sometimes the physicality, getting to the free throw line, playing a little too finesse can be a bit of an issue, but good screener as a pick and roll guy, also a pick and pop guy, will pop into, again, that free throw line elbow area where he's basically automatic. So yes, he's a good screener. I like good here as the word. I don't think he's a great screener. I don't think he's like a monster screener, but I think he's a good screener. What does it matter, bruh? One of my favorite names on here. Rui, Gabe, and a first for RJ Barrett. It's interesting. I think I would do that. I'm pulling up his contract just to always want to make sure the finances work. He is making 27.7 this year, 29.6 next year. So 27.7, Rui and Gabe gets you to 29. So you're in the clear there. I think it's a matter of just what Toronto, what they're trying to do, because apparently Toronto is trying to be competitive. They haven't really made moves since. I mean, they extended Jakob Poeltl, but they haven't really been going for it. I guess they technically went for it at the end of last season by trading for Ingram, but I know Kendrick Perkins has them as a top 6 team in the East. I have them at best as the 7th best team in the East, and I think that's probably a little high. I think they're probably more of like the 8th or 9th best team in the East, maybe even I think they're a play-in team. So they also gave up a lot to get RJ Barrett. So they might be viewing this as a little as selling low, but I think, because again, I think the thing I like to say always is just like a blanket statement with anytime we talk trades is like, even if a trade is valuable or even on paper, you have to put yourself in the other team's shoes. And it's like, is getting off RJ and getting the Lakers first, like, is that worth it for us? And like that calculation for the opposing team of, sure, on paper, we could say maybe Rui, Gabe, and a first is fair value for RJ. But why would Toronto want to do that? Is it just to get the first and then have the expirings of Rui and Gabe and maybe go into free agency next year? But I like to always look at it from the other team's perspective as well, just because, again, we could come up with trades that are fair, but like you have to think about the other team's motivation, where they're at the team building stage. And like RJ is clearly the best player in the deal and could be potentially a building block for them. You also got the Canada connection, which I don't think we should overlook. He's on the Canadian national team, and I think that plays really well in Canada. So I think that would probably be a little bit too, I think it's a fair trade, all things considered. I'm also a little bit lower on RJ than I think some people are, but I think for them, they'd probably want a little bit more, to be honest. Jackson, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, what's your analysis on Houston? Biggest, I'm guessing this is op. Although I usually, I guess you could spell op that way. I usually do it with two P's, but I think Houston, I'm torn between Houston and Denver as who's the best, or excuse me, the second best team in the West. I think OKC is still the best team, and they could get better if they really want to. They have picks to trade, infinite picks to trade, and Shea's going to be better next year. Chet's going to be better next year. J-Dub's going to be better next year. Kason Wallace is going to be better next year. Hartenstein is still, I mean, maybe he's in his prime, but I think he's gotten better pretty much every year, though he did have rough playoffs at times. Caruso's probably peaking right now, but they just have, Wiggins and Isaiah Joe, and they're loaded. They're just incredible teams. So I think they're the best team in the West. I think it's probably between Houston and Denver as the number 2 seed, but as I said much earlier, don't want to count out the Lakers yet until we see what those teams are more fully formed right now than the Lakers are. Lakers have, I think, especially if they waive Shake, which I expect to happen at some point unless they trade him, like the Lakers have some work to do with the roster, particularly on the bench, but also I would say the starting wing spot. In terms of Houston, I think they've had the best offseason. KD trade, Adams extension, Capella, Jabari Smith extension, DFS, both taking him from the Lakers and adding him to what they do. I've said this before with them, but my big concern is the defensive side with Şengün and Van Vliet. I think there are lineups they can go to without those guys. But it kind of reminds me of the Knicks with Towns and Brunson, where if you have entry points into your defense at the top of your defense and the back of your defense, point guard and center, I think there's only so much you can do to protect those spots with your wing defense. And on paper, New York they had Bridges, they had Anunoby, they had Hart, they had McBride, they had even Robinson coming off the bench. And it was like, on paper, they had all these guys to protect Brunson and Towns, but it could only go so far in a playoff setting. I feel like Houston's kind of built the same way, where it's like you have even KD, I think, especially not as a primary defender, can be a useful help defender with his size and his IQ. But you got Eason, you got DFS, you got, of course, Amen Thompson, who's the crown jewel of the defense. You got Adams as a big rim protector off the bench, especially against like bench units. Capella, like you got some defensive talent there, even Whitmore and whatever. So, but you still have Şengün and Van Vliet playing these probably 30+ minute roles. And I'm really high on Şengün. I think he's arguably a top 20 player, at least top 25, but he's not good defensively. And Fred Van Vliet's like 5'11". So I just think that there are some limitations there with those guys. And are you like reducing their roles? I'm trying to think of like if we go back to this postseason and like they're playing an OKC or they're playing in Indiana and Halliburton still is in one piece in this scenario, like I just think those two teams were at a different level and they would have picked on Şengün and Van Vliet in ways that would have been problematic for Houston. So I think Houston's Achilles heel, no pun intended. And as someone who tore his Achilles, I feel like I can make that joke. I think the defense with Şengün and Van Vliet is like my weakness that I see. I also think if you could somehow find a way to slow down KD, I think their half court offense is like they're going to need Thompson or Smith to make a really big jump, which Could happen, but far from a guarantee. But I think they're pretty good. I think they're going to win 55 plus games. I think they'll be a 2 or 3 seed, and I think they should make at least the second round. JM Ball 11. Thank you for super chat. Rui and DK for D Hunter from the Cavs. I would do that. My question with Hunter, and again, I'm always looking at this through like the championship conference finals lens. Like, I don't know if he's good enough defensively. I think he's better defensively than Rui, but I don't know if he's enough of an upgrade to be like, I think if you're doing Rui and DK, like that's you could do some other trade with Gabe or Maxey in a first, but that's probably your one at bat. And I don't know if DeAndre Hunter is good enough. Do you think he's better than Rui or close? I mean, it's tough. I think he's probably better for what the Lakers need. I don't even know if he's better than Rui. I think it's relatively close, but he's probably better than Rui. But I think they need someone slightly better defensively. Jeremy McWells, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, the team is going to the next level. AR has to be the sixth man. He's always reminded me of Manu, and it would bring balance to the squad. Do you think with new owners it could happen? I mean, I do see the Manu comparison, and that was the way that, remember Darvin Ham framed it that way when they moved Austin to the bench. I get the balance perspective. I also think you could potentially get there with moving Rui to the bench and having him more as a sixth man, especially if you get that starting wing and keep Rui. I don't know if the new owners make it happen. I think that has to be more of a JJ and Rob conversation. Maybe that is the new owners talking to JJ and Rob and then facilitating that. I don't think the new owners, and especially with Genie continuing to be the governor for the foreseeable future, like I don't see them. I think that would be kind of overstepping the typical owner like protocol in terms of I don't think they're gonna step in and tell JJ or Rob how to do business necessarily. I think of course those are collaborative discussions and I'm not saying those conversations aren't had, but like I think it's atypical for them to just step in and be like, this has to happen. Unless, look, there's some owners who do that, right? But they're not always perceived as the best owners in the league. I think it's more of a collaborative, organic process typically. But look, it could happen. I think I think Austin is a starting level player. I don't think that's disputable. We could debate the fit with Luka and whether he should come off the bench or what. But I think Austin, like, if you're, I know this is a bit of a reductive way of looking at it, but like there are 60 starting guards in the league. Austin is a top 60 guard in the league. I think even if you don't believe in Austin, even if you're an Austin hater, I think you're his biggest hater if you don't think he's a top 60 guard in the league. Like a top six, like the 60th best guard in the league is probably not even a top 100 player. So I think at a minimum, Austin is there. Then, so I think that's like the baseline of like, he's a top 60 guard. And of course I know like some teams have 4 top 60 guards and that kind of skews it, but like he's a top 60 guard and he's about to get paid 30 plus million. So I don't know. I have a hard time seeing the Lakers paying him and him coming out. Like it's hard to justify a $35 million bench player. That's kind of my point. Like, again, I think if they're going that route, they probably should just trade him. Said, would you give up a first and Dalton for Tamani Kamara? Yes. I think Portland would want more than that though. But if you could do that, I would do that. Blue Scar. Back, I like the double name. What makes a monster screener versus a good screener? I like this question. I would say like Ivica Zubac to me is a monster screener where he is aggressive with his screens. He's a really big body, but it's like the timing, it's the ferocity, it's making contact. Like that's a big thing with setting screens. Some guys set screens, some guys make contact with their screens, right? So I think I probably would have to do like a film breakdown to really show how I view a monster screener versus a good screener. But I think monster screeners can, send a guy to the floor, or really, I think it's almost in a way kind of like shot blocking where you kind of know the impact when you see it in terms of like, I think for me, it's not even about like setting the physical screen that gets the guy to the floor. It's like, do you create an opening for your teammate? And if you can create an opening for your teammate, then that is you doing your job at a high level. And I think it's similar with rim protection and stuff. It doesn't even always have to be a blocks, but are you altering shots? Are you actually, it's probably better to not swat it to the third row. It's better to pass it, hit it to a teammate, hit it to yourself, save it. So I think we're talking like degrees here, right? Where what makes a great scorer versus a good scorer, or a monster scorer versus a good scorer. Like it's just doing something at a higher level. But I think Ayton's a good screener. I wouldn't say he's like, the best screener in the league or one of the best screeners in the league. I think Steven Adams is another one. Steven Adams is a monster screener. You know a Steven Adams screen when you see a Steven Adams screen. Like dude just clears people out and he makes contact and he opens things up for his teammates. So I think there are some guys who I think Jokic is a monster screener as well. Like there's part of it is like a physical thing. Some of these guys are just a little beefier, a little stronger than Ayton, but I think he's a good screener. And more importantly, I think he's a really, really good roller and a really, really good finisher. And that helps him have really good pick and roll chemistry. Jovan, what would it take to get Keegan Murray? Good question. He's on my list, as I mentioned earlier, my potential trade list. I think for Keegan, I'm gonna look at his contract because I think that's always a factor. There's also the element of I never, I said earlier, I never know what Sacramento's doing. And I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything. So 11.14. Well, he's a restricted free agent next summer. So yeah, he's 11.14 for this upcoming season. So, I mean, could you get there with like Gabe and a first? Could you get there with Gabe Dalton and a first? That is a lot to give up. So maybe I'll retract that. I guess Gabe and a first or Gabe and Dalton, something like that. Maybe depends. Like again, Sacramento, I think has unconventional ways of valuing their players and doing business sometimes. So it depends how they view him. But my one thing with Keegan Murray is I do see some overlap with Rui in terms of, I think he's more of a 4 than a 3. So I don't know if he's quite the wing defender that you would want him to be or that he would be used as, but I like him. I like him a lot. I think he would be worth it depending on the price. Again, I think Dalton and a first is probably too much. Okay, this one. Legend of Experiment. Okay, so they had the Lakers as the best team in the West, which I get if you're a Lakers fan, but you say Ayton's a better rebounder, post player, screener, passer, better at guarding bigs, then he's better than AD. I will respectfully disagree there. Although I don't know if you're in a fight with someone, so I'll leave that one alone. Mr. TD, Keegan for cheap only, not a big fan. Yeah. I like Keegan, but yeah, it depends on, I think like I would be okay with him if you flip a Rui. AAA, AR needs to start working out, taking care of his body. That was one of the things I said he needs to improve on this offseason. I agree. I think he needs to last longer within these seasons. All right, going to go about 10, 15 more minutes here. Try to keep it around 2 hours. Dark Galaxy said he's more of a 3. The Kings made him a 4, and he wasn't good at that. I mean, that's also kind of the Rui thing, is that Rui isn't as good of a rebounder as you'd want for a 4. I guess you could talk me into Keegan as a 3. I just don't think he's like quite mobile and quick enough laterally to be a full-time 3, but could be wrong there. Greg King, what % chance they can get Herb? 35, 40%, I'd say. Kane Carter, Jovan, when you cover players, does your personal interactions ever affect how you view them? Are you able to keep your biases aside? Good question. I would say I try my best to keep my biases aside. I'm human, so I'm not going to lie and say that I've never had bias or I've never had player interactions affect that. Sometimes it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where I'm not going to get into names, but I'm sure you guys can connect some of the dots. But like, there have been a couple players recently over the last few years who I have been critical of their play at times because I have felt they have underperformed and they have underperformed their contracts. They have underperformed at big moments. And those players have not liked my criticism. I don't know how they get word of it, but they have gotten word of it. And there have been confrontations, there have been conversations. And in those instances, I try to keep an open mind and hear their perspective. It doesn't change my opinion. And if you're not shooting well or not playing well or underperforming, like, I'm going to call it as I see it. And if I think you're not playing well, I'm going to say that or do my best to be objective and call that out. And some people don't like that. Now, if you are very confrontational with me, like, naturally, I'm not going to, like, I can respect it, I can understand it, but I don't have to love it. And I think naturally, like, the more confrontation there is, the more I'm not necessarily going to like a person. But I would say in general, most of my player interactions have been positive. There's been a few exceptions, but I try to keep that stuff. So I also think there's a flip side of it, right? Where there are certain guys that I have great interactions with or great relationships with, and I try to put that bias to the side as best I can. So it is a balancing act, but I can't say I'm like a robot, right? So Greg King says he just joined the stream. What up? Thanks for hopping on. Dream, by the way, says, if we get Al, do you think we still trade for a big? Probably not. I don't think it would make much sense in that case. I think it would probably just make more sense to sign like another vet min big, or maybe it's Christian Coloco. But I think with the limited assets that they have, I think it would make a lot more sense to just go all in on a wing. Prince J Jr., appreciate the work you do. Who do you have as the most realistic wings to trade for, and what do you predict for the rest of the offseason? Appreciate it, Prince J. I think I still think Andrew Wiggins is the guy. I think that's the most realistic of like the good names. I guess we've talked now about Herb Jones or Miles Bridges. Is it a Royce O'Neal? Is it a KCP? I don't think Mathurin is on the board right now. We've been talking about Keegan Murray. I think MPJ is too expensive. I think Drew Holiday really just depends what Portland's doing. But those are some of the names I would say when looking at who's out there. Some of the names I've heard, some of the names just looking at cap sheets and depth charts that make some sense. I think either one of the New Orleans wings would be great, but I think the Trey Murphy price is it's going to be pretty difficult for LA to match. And then predict for the rest of the offseason, I think they're going to sign D'Anthony Melton. I don't think they're going to get Al Horford. I think they're going to trade for a backup center. And then I think they'll fill out the roster with like another minimum player or two. Then probably trade for a wing. But again, as we've gone through, some of these names aren't the best fit. Some of these names are pretty high prices. But I would assume they make 1 to 2 trades for a wing and a backup, and then also sign Melton and probably another minimum player. Swavey 380, hear me out. Maybe this was Ayton's plan the whole time since being drafted. Slouch his way to free agency and to LA. Now he'll thrive and repair his rep. I'll hear you out. There's a couple of, I don't know if those are emojis or what they are, but it says OBJ. I don't think he did this because he's actually, the thing I didn't mention that was an interesting factor within all this, Ayton's actually losing $1.75 million, and no one's going to cry for a multimillionaire who's probably, I would have to look at his career earnings, but I would assume I think has made over $100 million already. So I'm not painting him as some victim here, but like entering, a week ago, he was set to make $35.6 million. This year, between Portland and LA, he's going to make just almost $2 million less than that. So, the guy is losing money here. And it's in part due to Portland's situation, and they're just going in a different direction with younger bigs. But I also think if like he fully lived up to his potential or his, perception or whatever, then he probably isn't bought out and he's like the center of the future in Portland. Right. So, I like the theory. It's interesting, but I think the last part's the most important, where I think he is going to thrive in LA, and I think he is going to bounce back perception-wise in a big way and get himself a nice contract next summer and make up that $1.75 million. What does it matter, bruh? To be clear, no AR hate at all. To your point, he's a top 50 period, in my opinion, but I do think his skill set is best optimized off the bench. Rob's bad talent allocation has done more damage than anything else the last 3 years. Yeah, and look, I don't think that just because if you think Austin should come off the bench, I don't think you dislike Austin. I don't think you're crazy. If you think they should trade Austin, I don't. Like, I know some of the people that want him traded don't like him, but that's fine. Like that everyone has their opinion or perspective. Like I think to your point here, like I agree. I think he's a top 50 player, and I think pretty much all the other guys in the top 50 don't come off the bench. So that's just kind of a tough situation to navigate there. I think the point I made before is we've seen guys like Jalen Brunson and Kyrie fit next to Austin, and for what, like Jalen Brunson, I've said this a million times, Dallas Jalen Brunson was not New York Jalen Brunson, different player. Kyrie's Kyrie, so I'm not saying Austin's Kyrie, but I would argue that Austin is a better defender than both of them. He is 6'5". Jalen Brunson's 6'1". He's built like a brick house, but he's just short enough where you could shoot over him. Kyrie, I think when he has really turned it on, especially in the playoffs, can be a plus defender, but in general, also at 6'2", 6'3", there's some limitations there. Like Austin is a legit shooting guard size, and sometimes the strength and physicality can be issues for him, but like I think he's a better defender than both of them, and it worked with Luka. I think that my opinion is the bigger issue has been the front court and how they've built out the front court. They have not had good enough rim protection, good enough rebounding, good enough two-way wings, and that to me has been the biggest issue. And I think if you're going to make the fit work with Luka and Austin, you have to have the right front court players, and I don't think the Lakers currently have the right front court players to maximize it. So that's where, again, maybe you could talk me into it, or you could talk Austin or the Lakers into it. I just think based on everything I've heard, they're propping him up as part of a big three. And again, those types of players don't come off the bench. So we could debate whether he should or not. I'm just saying I'm fairly confident. I never want to say like 100% because there's always some wiggle room with all these things, but like I'm fairly confident he's not going to be coming off the bench. Going to go about 5 more minutes here. Jovan, is that, or Jovan? Close to my name. I like it. Lakers have $60 million expiring contracts. Should we trade Austin, Rui, Gabe, and Dalton for Giannis? Yes, if you can. Throw in the pick, throw in the 4 pick swaps, throw in the second, throw in 1% of ownership. Throw it all on the table for Giannis. Yes, I would do that in a heartbeat. Milwaukee just did one of the craziest things in NBA history by stretching Dame, and I think that's going to be a disaster. It's going to lead to Giannis leaving, but yeah. Triple A says big 3 Austin. I mean, yes. Again, you could disagree. I'm just telling you the way that they talk about him. Throwing the lies, please tell me what the Lakers are going to do for defense. Well, hopefully they trade for a defensive wing because that has to be the start. Hector, Rui, and Reeves for Jalen Johnson. I would do that. I don't think Atlanta would do that. Ask Madden, Turducken. Lakers now have 3 of the 4 coldest white boys in Luka, Reeves, Connect, and now Laravia. Have 3 now 4 of the coldest white. Yeah, they got the whiteout lineup. You can throw in Maxi Kleba. Alex Smash, please get AO and Melton need more defensive dogs. I love AO. I don't know if he's gettable. Mr. TD says big 2.5. Amir Coffee. I like coffee. Oh, I do. I love coffee actually, but Amir Coffee, yeah. For BAE or minimum. Kane Carter, Jovan, how do you handle heated discussions, disagreements in sports? Do your friends, colleagues have strongly differing opinions with hoops? I'll be honest. I really don't like, I'll say this. If you're watching right now, you're part of the late night gang, you're part of the channel, you're part of the podcast, you're part of, you're a Laker fan and you come up to me, that's a different story. I'm sure I've met some of you. Like I get stopped, usually once or twice at, per game at games, and we'll take pictures, we'll talk, we'll answer questions. I won't answer on here just because I'm not in front of a microphone. But in general, I try to stay away from talking hoops just because I do it. It's my job. I do it all the time. So if it's not in like a situation where I have to do it, I try to save it because the one thing, and look, it's not like I'm not trying to complain here, but anytime anyone finds out what I do for my job, it's always like, because everyone's a sports fan, right? So then they try to, it'll be, well, what do you think about this conspiracy theory? Or like, this is my theory on this. And like, on one hand, I get it, I respect it, and because I know they're a sports fan and like that that's what I do for a living. But sometimes it can be a little tiring to like talk about it all the time outside of a work setting. So I do try to like limit it when I can. But obviously when I'm on here, like I'll answer your non-basketball questions, but I expect nothing but basketball questions. And if I'm at a game or I'm at practice or whatever, and we're talking just with like the media people, like we'll talk about it all. We'll get into some heated stuff about this player versus this player, or this player should be starting. Like we talk a lot of strategy of, I'm always talking strategy of the rotation or schematics or analytics or whatever. So I talk about this like all day, basically. It's just more so when I'm in like a real world setting, I try to take a step back, and I'd rather talk about what you do for a living and what, you're interested in that's like not sports. But so in terms of disagreements, like I'm of the mindset, a lot of times we see this in politics especially, but I think sports to a lesser degree. And I think we see it typically with like the Austin conversation, where it's like, I have my opinion on Austin. All of you have your opinion on Austin. Neither one of us is probably going to change our opinion on Austin. Like we could debate it, we could disagree, we could get heated, but like no one's really changing their opinion. And I think a lot of times people just don't change their opinion on like whatever they think. So sometimes like I'm down to have the debate, I'm down to have the discussion, but once it gets to a certain point where it's getting too heated, or we've just been going in circles with the same conversation, part of me is just like, at that point, I want to just drop it. Like there's really no point to keep going. Telly Khalifa, sorry, just tuning in. Do you think a bigger need right now is point of attack defender or backup wing? I would say starting wing actually is the biggest need. If you want to put that as a point of attack defender, then sure. I think they probably need to add 3 defenders into the rotation, arguably. But certainly a starting wing and then another starting or point of attack / backup, or backup wing / point of attack defender. So I think that's going to be D'Anthony Melton, and then you need to trade for a starting wing. Fang Charlie, sup Jovan. I was right about Ayton. His fit is best with LA. Now I'm worried about the values of our expirings. How about Vando starting for Rui? I think the biggest issue with starting. So defensively, I think of course it's an upgrade, and that would be the biggest argument for it. I think offensively, my biggest concern is it just gives teams a hiding spot to pack the paint. against Ayton rolls, against LeBron post-ups, against Luka and Austin drives. Like, I just, teams do not guard Vando. And at this point, he doesn't make you pay with his shooting. He doesn't make you pay with his offensive rebounding or his finishing around the basket. So I think he's really regressed offensively. And I don't think the player we saw last year was a starting level player. So I think you're almost putting fit above talent. And I think there's a lot, like, I think fit can make up for a talent gap to an extent, but I think we need to see a lot more from Vando offensively to justify him starting, to be completely honest. Like, ideally, like, I'll say, I'd rather start I think Jake LaRavia is the guy who makes more sense, because I think Jake LaRavia is a better defender than Rui, and especially a better wing defender than Rui. So I think if you're going to move Rui to the bench with the current group, I would actually start LaRavia, because I think he's more of a perimeter defender than Rui is, and also even more of a perimeter defender than DFS was. I think DFS was a much better interior defender and more of a rim protector in like small ball groups. But I actually think LaRavia's defensive film on the perimeter is pretty impressive. D.A. Berkis, thank you for the super chat. Kuminga, Keegan, or Najee as options. Cost. Well, Kuminga is going to cost a lot because he's a free agent, so it's going to have to be a sign-in trade. He wants 30 plus million. Maybe he can get 25 plus million, but like he's going to be 25 plus million. I'd be surprised if, I mean, maybe low 20s at the very lowest, but like, I think he's just because of his pedigree and the potential there, he's going to get in the mid 20s or higher. You got to figure out like, what does Golden State want? I don't think Golden State's just taking back Gabe and Maxey. I think they're going to want Rui. It's probably like Rui in a first gets you in that conversation. Maybe Rui and Gabe in a first. And that's interesting, I guess. I don't think he's good enough defensively for that starting three spot, but maybe you just want to overwhelm with length, athleticism, and size, and like you just go with a giant front court. Keegan and I think Najee's gettable, but he had like a sneaky, like impressive close to the season last year in Dallas and showed some off the dribble chops and playmaking chops. Like he was running backup point guard or even starting point guard at times for them, which is kind of wild, but he's someone that, like, I don't know, Gabe plus something. I want to do a first or Dalton, but like, could you do Gabe in a second? Maybe, I don't know. I've said this before, but the Lakers are in kind of a weird spot with their assets where they either have to overpay or they're kind of doing these underwhelming offers. And I think ideally it would be like Gabe in 2 seconds. I think that's probably fair value for Najee, but they don't have that. And then Keegan, I talked about him a little bit earlier, but it's probably like borderline first round value. Random Y, is Len still a Laker? No, he is not. Zach Roberts, thoughts on trading for a big and DA playing more for? Depends who the big is. I think Ayton's got mobility, but I don't think he's quite as mobile to play four full time. Like, for comparison's sake, he's not as mobile as Chet. I'm trying to think of the other double bigs off the top of my head. We see like Şengün and Adams work together, so like I think he's more mobile than both of those guys. So it can work depending on the five, but I think this is very dependent on the five. I'd be okay with double big lineups. And this goes back to last year's conversation with AD and the double big stuff. Like, I'm more okay with double big lineups than I am a full-time double big look, but it depends on the center. So I think if you gave me a list of like 5 centers, I could probably tell you for each one if I thought they'd fit with DA. But I do think DA is more of a 5 than a 4. I think you're stretching that a little bit, especially like I think you need a lights out 3 defensively to make this work. Otherwise, if it's like Rui or LeBron, like LeBron can be a really good defender at the 3, but it's just a lot to ask of a 41-year-old. Elite Hoops, what do you think of Haywood Highsmith? I like him. Just another guy that Miami values highly. So I think the price is a little tricky. Would you do Dalton for Haywood Highsmith? Like that might be the cost, and I don't know if I would. He's also, I think, $5 million expiring. By the way, let me know if there's any breaking news, because I think we're getting to the point of the day where something could be happening. Maybe not. Prince J Jr. KD trade about to become a 7-team trade per Fred Katz. Okay, so I think I saw something about that. Rockets and Suns are working on expanding the Kevin Durant trade into a deal that would involve a league record 7. Wow. So it would be Hawks, draft night. So I was wondering if the Lakers were getting involved with Nick Richards, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. That's wild, though. That's a league record. Gorilla, Jovan, Fred Katz says KD trade will involve 7 teams because the Lakers get involved. Based on his reporting and the way it was just framed, it sounds like these are all draft night trades that would be combined into one giant 7-team trade. But if I'm the Lakers, I try to get involved and get Nick Richards. Samuel, I guess these are all. So I asked you guys for breaking news and you delivered. I was just a few minutes late here, catching up on the chat. Telly Khalifa, do you think this is what Dave McMenamin was referring to? I do. The more I thought about it in talking to some people, it sounded more like the Lakers potentially getting involved in an agreed upon trade. And that's why I think Nick Richards has kind of been the guy that's been floated, to be honest. But it really depends if the Lakers are getting in here. So there's been a little bit of Nick Richards buzz. And I think, to be clear, I think Nick Richards is a backup, so I would much prefer him as a backup than a starting. I was a little worried there for a second. He was maybe going to be their starting center, and I was like, that's not good. Telly Khalifa, hey, Jovan, will you be at Summer League, by the way? Yes, I will be there July 10th to 13th. Let me know in the chat if you guys are going to be at Summer League, because maybe I could do a meetup. Yovs, similar to my name too. Brett Siegel says the Lakers are in it. Okay, well, okay, so let me take a step back here, because actually the Lakers were part of a draft night trade because they traded up with obviously the Bulls. And why am I blanking on who is 45? They bought the Bulls pick, and then was it the Suns or the Nets? I guess the Lakers could be in this. Okay. Interesting. Sorry, I'm processing this all in real time. I guess the Lakers were mentioned, and I missed it. I was reading quickly the story. So, yeah, the Lakers are one of the 7 teams. My mistake. I misread that. So, it'd be Hawks, Nets, Warriors, Lakers, Timberwolves with the Rockets and Suns. Okay, so the Lakers are in it, but that's the Thiero trade, which, remember, that's the correct way to pronounce it. Maybe they get Nick Richards in this. That would be something. Bri, yo, would you trade Shaedon Sharpe for Austin? No, I would not. I think at some point, maybe that is more of a discussion, but I think at this point, the production you've seen from Austin is at a different level than Shaedon Sharpe in like high stakes environment. Hey, Jovan, have you heard anything lately about the Wiggins talk that came just around before the draft? No, other than like the price just not being high enough. Okay, so I'll say this. I'm going to wrap here, but if the Lakers trade for Nick Richards, I'll hop back on and we'll talk about it. But I'm going to spend some time with my wife. I'm probably going to FaceTime my son. He's coming out here tomorrow. So going to wrap here. Let me see. Did I miss a question? No. I think here. Tyler, is Maxey just a trade asset at this point, or can he have some value as a rotation player? I think his main value is as a trade asset in just not even as a, I think trade asset is a kind term here. I think it's mainly an expiring contract. But I think he could, if they don't end up trading him, he could have value as a rotation player if he bounces back. I will say he was having a down year last year. It started to look like he was starting to show his age a little bit pre-injury. He really struggled with his shooting, which is like one of I think the two main strengths he has are his shooting and his defensive versatility. If he can get the shooting back and get the defensive versatility back, he has some real utility as a bench stretch big with some versatility. It can play the four even a little bit defensively, but a stretch big who has some versatility on the defensive end. So there's a scenario in which they keep him and he helps and he is beloved by Luka, but I think at this point most of his value is on the expiring end. But all right, I'm going to pop off for now, but if they do make a trade, I will hop back on. But appreciate you all. Shout out to the Late Night Gang. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you have not checked out my Jake LaRavia scouting report, check that out on the channel. It's about 25 minutes diving into his strengths, his weaknesses, his game. I have a bunch of film on there for those of you that want to learn more about him or into film breakdowns. This is also my first film breakdown, so would love to have some feedback of what you guys think about it in different ways. I could change the format moving forward, but try to give you an overview of his game, then break it down into the nitty gritty. So let me know with that. But appreciate you all. And for those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. Let's get those subscribe numbers up. Let's get those likes up. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I might be back in like 5 minutes, but if not, I will talk to you tomorrow.